Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another Sunday with Elfbait. You'll notice the camera angle has changed. I'm still up here, and so it's still feeling it out. Um, Used to have all of my computers in a row, and now they are in a tidy little L shape. Um, Hope everybody's having a good morning. Grumpy Old Slan, I see you already chimed in. Um, got 4 people watching right now, and there's my phone making a bunch of noise. Like I said, figuring out this new setup. so, um, Decided I would talk about. Hey, mages, uh, fun. Hey, you play that game. That's the priority. Tonka Todd, I see you made it. Let's see. Deserves a Ric Flair woo woo. But there you go. And let's see. So where was I? Now that you've derailed my overly tenuous train of thought, um, some thoughts I had on um, drawing out the length of time between the levels in Fifth Edition. Hey, Saxious, and hey, Geek. John is here. I'm sure you're still feeling the convention. Looked like a fun one. Um, so it's those small local conventions are always great because you don't have to worry about booking room or any. Yeah, I mean the area, so you already know what's to eat, things like that. So if you can find conventions on your home turf, it's always a win. Let's see. Yep, definitely. Tonka Todd. Um, Mage's channel is never disappoints. The ever changing cast of players has me absolutely jealous, though. I have to admit, it's just one of those things where I would so very much love to have a fertile uh, player pool, a stable, if you will, of potential interested players who seem to have that level of maturity that you need to play a dangerous old school game without folks getting butthurt over character death and stuff. If I seem a little snarky this morning, I apologize, but that's just where I'm at mentally today. Uh, I do have my game with Saxious today. That should be fun. Our session 2, enjoying being a player there. We'll see if Dugan of Moorwatch and his compatriots can do something about these villainous traitors who have taken over the local lighthouse. So, back on track. Good morning. So what I'm going to say today, what I'm going to talk about today, could be applied to any game, and really is more universally usable. But the it particularly speaks to one of the big complaints I've heard about Fifth Edition a lot, which is the speed at which players or characters, I should say, level up, which has various adverse effects on player effectiveness, in my opinion. Everything I'm going to say is my opinion and my suggestion, so take it for what you will. Just a second here. My computer decided that it wanted to put my monitor to sleep. What are you doing here? Hey, hold on, guys. Technical difficulties. There we go. Yeah, that's fun. Let's not do that anymore. Uh, so, anyways, I think it's safe to say, and pretty much inarguable, that Fifth Edition has one of the fastest, if not the fastest, character progression out of any edition of D&D. And while there are all sorts of complicated ways in which you can tweak the system and multiply the amount of XP that you have to get to, there you don't have to, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. So what I'm proposing is a way to address this. Actually, before I continue on to that, let me finish talking about why it's bad to progress too quickly. Characters progress too fast. Players don't learn their characters. They spend too little time, especially in a game with fifth edition, where you're constantly gaining new abilities. They spend less time with any set of powers at any particular skill level, and their new spells and all of that, and so they're at a constant state of playing catch up with their character and are never able to truly learn to play that character to its fullest, and to appreciate the abilities they have. And this has detrimental effects on the pace of play and I think overall game satisfaction. Um, the pace of play is affected negatively because folks are always scrambling um, at what to do. If you don't know your character inside and out, you've not had a chance to really get a hold of the abilities of your character as they come through. You are when it comes your turn in at the table, you are more likely to be unprepared and spend more time hemming and hawing. Even if you are putting your time between your actions, between your turns, to good use. Um, this, of course, is contagious because any sort of dissatisfaction at the table tends to bleed out and affect the other players, and the DM, who I will always. A DM is absolutely a player in a game. So when I say players, I'm not only referring to the players playing the characters, but also the DM. The other problem with that is I feel like if the only satisfaction you're getting from your character is in the gaining of new abilities, then you are perpetually antsy, sitting there waiting for the next ability. Morning, Daniel. So you sort of find that you'll find that your players are perpetually writing the dopamine, but they're writing the short, strong hits of dopamine and not the more satisfying, uh, continuous drip that you get from a well played, satisfying, and I'm going to use that word way too much, I know, but yeah, and let's call it a enjoyable, enriching experience that a good table game can be. So all of that said, um, let me jump into what I'm proposing to do to fix this. And honestly, the idea came from my thoughts on my other great love of role playing games, and that is Call of Cthulhu. I've been writing some scenarios lately, and so it's really got my brain in the mindset of, you know, not story, but plot beats, clues, the pace of a game. And so it occurred to me that without penalizing players and their characters by multiplying the XP requirements, um, by say, I don't know, reducing the XP count that monsters generate, you could take the Call of Cthulhu approach and use it in a 5e game. 5e is particularly well suited for this because 5e, successfully or not, is more of a skill-based version of D&D. And so it offers players a whole host of things that they can do with their character outside of combat. Um, in other words, it offers them much more dice rolly, gameable fun outside of combat. And at the end of the day, D&D and other role-playing games are games, and we're there to roll dice and engage in the playing of a game as opposed to just telling stories. Let's see real quick here. Another side effect to that overlooked. Uh, yeah, I mean this is true as well, and I can kind of relate my experience with board games a lot to that. Um, because my gaming group back home um, in Washington um, had so many board games and they were constantly picking up new board games. Those board games were really intriguing and really compelling, and we wanted to play them all, but we rarely ever played the same game more than once. And so, where I think this relates to your statement, Grumpy, is that we never got good at those games. We would learn them, we would enjoy them, but we rarely had a chance to come back to the game and apply what we had learned about the game on that first playthrough. It was a rare treat to come back and play the same game again and apply what you had. Unfortunately, it was often spaced so far apart that each time you were playing, it was like learning it again. But you're absolutely right. Not the constant pace of change with 5e characters does not allow players a chance to adjust based on what they've learned. Um, so yes, so and your next comment really gets to the meat of it. Slow your games down to allow the players to spend more time at any given level with any set of abilities. And that's a short form in a nutshell way to put it forward. And the way that you can really do this is, like I said, applying more of that Call of Cthulhu sort of method of play. It does require, like any sort of change to the game system, or face it, let's say any game, uh, a level of buy-in by the players. And so you would, of course, want to make sure that you discuss this up front and that this is clearly laid out. But what you would need to do is, first of all, change your thinking on the danger level of individual encounters, how many of them there are in any particular adventure, and how those encounters are approached. So standard D&D is a never-ending stream of small encounters that lead towards an ultimate goal. You know, 6 kobolds here, a dozen goblins there, an ogre, a couple of creepy crawlies in the caves, and you just kind of keep mowing your way through them and they kind of get progressively tougher and tougher. In a Call of Cthulhu game, your threats are generally fewer, farther between, and more dangerous, which then motivates you to do the investigation, the intel, the background interactions with NPCs and all of that, to try to find the way to approach the dangerous enemy with the least amount of risk to your characters. It's not always possible depending on the scenario, and and you can still apply that to this new way of looking at D&D 5e. But with 5e, you have the makings for that. You've got skills. Your characters have things that they can do outside of swinging their sword and casting spells. And even those spells can help in regards to that investigative play. But you do have to put a little bit more thought into your scenarios when you're developing them. Or, I mean, and it's definitely not something that you can just use to adapt existing scenarios. I mean, you could, but that's probably more work than building up from the ground up. So first of all, you need to kind of like really find baddies that are technically above the pay grade of your players. I would say in this style of campaign design, your standard encounter should be, by 5th edition standards, should be a dangerous or deadly encounter. Um, you're still going to have room for minor encounters, but you need to think of those in terms of not just steps to gain experience, but you need to think about them as steps to move the plot along in important and meaningful ways. Even Call of Cthulhu has minor threats like cultists and stuff. Although, I mean, characters are a little bit more fragile in Call of Cthulhu, so even a cultist is dangerous. But I'm not saying don't have any smaller monsters. You got to make sure the throat still works. What I am saying, however, is to um, make those monsters, those minor monsters, count. And so now you would say, for example, pick some big, not super powerful, but using the CR system, which of course is flawed, broken, and really non-functional, you can still guide yourself. So instead of looking at things that are easily handleable by your players, you need to pick nasty monsters. For a first level party, look at CR 4, 5, or 6 as the primary thing they're going against. And sure, those monsters are probably going to deal out enough damage to where they can kill the party real quick and easy if they approach it from the standard D&D trope. You would not want to do that in standard D&D play because you're just setting your players up to die, especially in 5e. So once you have that figured out, you then have to start building up the rest of this. And the ultimate goal here is, again, to slow down the progression of experience by making each climb through the experience ranks take more time. But it needs to be meaningful time. So you would then need to start creating adventures in D&D that are created like you would say any I'm going to say Call of Cthulhu, but really any investigative sort of scenario. You have to have places where players can get clues, places where NPCs are, and you also have to seed in useful and usable elements that will allow the players to ultimately face those larger, more powerful foes. For example, Call of Cthulhu, you can defeat the big bads. In fact, the fiction that the game is based on, whether it's Lovecraft himself or all of his contemporaries, generally has a large percentage of instances in which the big bads are dealt with, perhaps at a cost, but there's usually some sort of method that allows the characters in the stories to deal with them. And this is a little trickier with D&D because D&D is so pre-packaged. Like, this monster does this, and it's vulnerable to this, and it's immune to this. And that's why I think the higher CR monsters work better for this style of play, and then will allow you to have a adventure that precedes those encounters, um, um, and that allows the players to find out how to deal with that. Yes, a specific method. And so if you ever look at D&D, you'll find D&D monsters, especially, you'll find that a lot of the high power monsters are immune to a crap ton of stuff or resistant to a crap ton of stuff, but then they're also often vulnerable to certain things. And this is where this play style works, is that now the players are thinking less like um, murder hobos or even just standard adventurers, and more like The Witcher or something to that effect. You are looking for the vulnerability, the in And as a DM, you're going to have to flex a bit and work on a little bit more um, the themes of your monster. So you might have to build in some extra lore or even pay attention to the lore sections that are in the monster manual that give you lots of fun little bits that never have game mechanics. If it talks about a monster being tied to a particular alignment of the stars, then that is your player, perhaps your players en route to defeating that monster and taking care of that threat. But where and this then changes the fun of the campaign from finding the monster in its lair and killing it to going through all the methods, the library visits, the seeking out ancient temples where you can find that lost bit. It's also an opportunity to like put artifacts in the hands of lower level players. Maybe not permanently, but perhaps a one shot item or something to that effect. Uh, Shatter spells. So yeah, and this is exactly what I'm getting at. Your investigation is to figure out what the method is to beat the creature or how to survive it. In a lot of cases, it's not a matter of beating the monster; it's a matter of how do you not die from it. Now, I don't want to lean too much on the tropes of Call of Cthulhu because we're not talking about playing Call of Cthulhu. Ultimately, we still want to deliver a fantasy game with a fantasy feel that is still rewarding. Players are still going on adventures, they're still slaying monsters. But and key thing right there is you also have to think about it from the standpoint of classic folklore and mythology is less about wading your way through hundreds of goblins and more about finding the dragon's lair, getting to the Cyclops' cave, and dealing with the monster. I mean, one way to actually make this work with this method in your fantasy campaign is to make those potent monsters rare, like very rare, or even singular. There are enough monsters written out for 5e now that each one of those powerful monsters could be the sole example of its kind. They're not reproducing out there and having, families and stuff. They are now mythical, epic, cosmic, whatever you want to call it, creatures that need to be dealt with. I mean, certainly not all of them. Your vampires are now a vampire master who's a group of like low level players are having to figure out how to beat him, and they just can't charge into his lair and kill him. They're going to have to role play it out. But another important thing here is this is not all on the players either. Listening to this, it can be really easy to go, well, great, you're just making the players do all this work. No, you as the DM are also going to have to put in a good amount of work. You have to build that structure to allow for the players to find the clues, to find the methods to deal with these creatures. They need to go on mini quests and side quests to find the eye of whatever so they could look in to the creature's lair or the mirror that will reflect the soul of the evil whatever to where they can freeze it in its tracks so they can then kill it. They need to find that sword. They need to find that oil that they can treat their weapons with. It's a good chance to use powerful but one-shot items, disposable items. I'm sure Omen Owl is out there going, yeah, because I'm kind of talking about one of his favorite things. What is it? I can't remember the Numenera thing that he really likes. But you really and the goal here is your players are still going to advance because each of these powerful monsters in D&D is still going to it's going to net them a good chunk of XP. So they're still going to level up. But while they're waiting to get to those big boosts in XP that they get for killing the big bad monster who they have no business taking on. They are going through so much more. They're using so much more of their character. They're going to be using their their listen skills or whatever. I'm in fifth edition, so it's very generic. They're going to be using their wilderness skills and their religion skill and their arcane skill, and they're going to be using medicine and all of these other skills that they might not normally roll for a lot in the games, because they're going to have to find stuff out. The players are also going to have to engage their thought processes a little bit more, because they're going to have to figure out how to have their characters figure this out. Even if their character is rolling, the character is finding the stuff out due to rolls that they make. The player is still having to push those buttons and steer that character in those directions to find that information. And so, yes, I mean it's not a huge, profound idea to slow play down, to slow XP increase, but it's the key here is to how do you make it enjoyable. And that is true. Locking vital information behind dice rolls, and I would say in the case of games, I think investigative games have long talked to this point, and that's like, if the players come up with a reasonable enough way to where they should find it, you don't need to necessarily have them roll for it. Um, I would, for example, well, I mean, you could. I mean, even Call of Cthulhu has that with the idea roll if you get really stuck. But I would say that, for example, if my player says, I'm going to search the room for clues, um, I might make him roll because he's not being specific. However, if he says, I'm going to take a few hours and give this place a thorough looking over, he's going to find the clue. Or if he says specifically, I'm going to look at the bookcase and see if there's anything hidden there, and I have a clue on the bookcase, he's going to find it. I'm not going to make him check. So I think it's important to remember that the checks are there, should be there really for when there is no time, and so it's being done quickly, and there's an opportunity for something to be missed, or when there is some sort of risk involved in or pressure involved in the searching for the clue or the whatever task you're doing. Um, no. So, and this is, I mean, although I get where I know you're joking, but you can make sure that this doesn't happen by making the answer not just a single thing. Okay, we found out that we need X to kill this thing. We then have to go to Y to get X, but maybe when we get to Y to get X, they need us to do Z. And so this is that process that draws out any particular encounter. Uh, RW Bishop, yes, that is a mistake, locking information behind a die roll. And so you generally want to avoid it, but it's a DM's place to kind of make those rulings and adjudicate it. I would not hand somebody a clue, for example, if they're being chased through an apartment building, and Call of Cthulhu is going to go on this, and they're saying, and as I go through every room, I'm going to look around and see if I see anything interesting. No, that's going to require a roll. They're trying to spot something while under duress, while there's a stress factor involved. Yeah, I'm gonna put you back in your soul gem. You keep that up. Uh, uh, yeah, I mean, MacGuffins are definitely important in this style of play. I mean, and of course, but I mean, though we don't want to them to just be MacGuffins, because I mean, generally speaking, a MacGuffin is the thing that gets people going, but really has no bearing on the story. Um, yeah, I mean, and this is that knowing how to pace it. Um, of course, you can call it Cthulhu. You have a margin of success on any die roll, so you can use that really to mediate how much information is figured out. You know, somebody says they searched the room in a very generic sense, and I have them roll, um, a spot hidden check in Call of Cthulhu. If they get a standard roll, they might find one thing out. If they get a hard, they might find a couple of bits. If they find an extreme, if they roll an extreme, well, then great. They rolled really well, and I'll probably give them more information. Um, or you can use that as the threshold. Example I did earlier of running through the rooms and trying to see things on the fly. You can say, all right, you can do it, but you're going to need to roll an extreme success to get uh, any sort of meaningful information out of it. And I'm sure you could probably dig into the 5e skill system and come up with um, a margin of success. I mean, actually, it's already in there. I mean, the DCs, you could treat those on a rolling scale. So yes, the DC to spot something may be 15, but if the player rolls a total of like 25, they've clearly beaten that margin. So you could feed them more information based on their margin of success. And the nice thing is those margins of success generally have names associated with them. So you can even go, all right, you're going to need a difficult success here. And then they could roll for that. Uh, and this is a way to use it as well. I mean, you can definitely do this, but I think the key is as a good GM is to not rely on one method or the other, and to always be flexible and have the method and the result fit the situation. Not every situation is a matter of time. Some situations can be a matter of resources, other resources, even expendable, disposable resources. Um, Sometimes it's not a matter how much time, but how much noise you made. Um, did you did you make it obvious that you were searching the bookshelf? When the villain comes back to his lair, is he going to go, you know, I I distinctly remember Huck Finn was there and not there, you know, or that book is sticking out, and I am so OCD that all my books are always perfectly flush. They're always faced just right. Um, but I think you're all getting the gist here, and that's that D&D can be fun and slow down and allow the players time to enjoy those characters, to learn those characters. Um, it's uh, it's too easy to just look at D&D and say it's all about the fighting and kicking down doors, killing monsters, and taking their stuff. And what I'm saying is it can still be about that, but it can be and I'm not going to say slow, because slow is the wrong term. It can be a more protracted experience that is still engaging and interesting. And I feel like fifth edition is really set up well to do that, because you have skills in the game that'll allow the players to still roll dice and still engage with the game system. And when it comes down to that final showdown, or those little intermediate encounters where you might have to bully a mook or fight your way through a couple of skeletons that are guarding that old temple that you need to go to find the book that you can read the words to stop the elder thing from appearing. The fighter's still going to get his chance. The cleric is still going to get a chance to do the turn. Um, you could, even as a GM, decide in these cases, maybe expand on some of the abilities, or if a player is like really, thinking on it, it's like, hey, I'm facing something that's really evil. Can I try to use my turn ability to phase it? Let's see. Yeah, Ravenloft 2 embody. Yeah, it definitely does. Even though Ravenloft 2 is kind of gross, but it's the there have been investigative D&D adventures before. It's not. I'm not in reinventing the wheel here. I'm not saying anything that hasn't been said before, but I feel like it doesn't get talked about enough. And I also feel like in the past, those investigative D&D games have D&D modules and scenarios have often fallen short because they are still trying. They're trying to give you an investigation while still delivering all of the beat after beat pace of a D&D module. And whatever reason that is, who knows. The other thing too is to remember that encounters don't always have to be monsters. So traps and hazards become really important and useful in an investigative game, because you know the thing is that you're not modifying the XP system at all here. The monsters are still delivering the XP. So you have to still be careful how many monsters you throw at your party. Otherwise, you're really not going to slow them down anymore. Um, but you want to make the meat around those monsters a lot thicker. Because in 5th edition, you don't really get XP for anything other than killing monsters. I mean, I as a GM in D&D have always given out role-playing bonuses and stuff like that. So that's a me thing. That's not a game system thing. And so when I talk about tweaking and modding systems, or I tend to think of them in the absence of house rules. Let's see, phase shifted thing. Oh, that's cool, and it's always um, comes down to how you ran it and who your players were too. So I feel like any module or scenario or adventure can be made good by a GM who wants to put some time into to polish the turd, uh, but also by players who want to interact with the adventure and really throw the GM for a loop. Um, that last Call of Cthulhu scenario that I ran for you guys was very much the success and the fun of that very much hinged on how you guys played your characters. A different set of players may have played those characters very differently, and the tone of the game and the pace and what was and was not accomplished would very much have been different. Um, I do want to run it again if for no other reason than just to see what another set of players does with it. Um, so yeah, you know your Ravenloft 2 experience, if it was great, awesome. I've never played all the way through it. I have looked into it. I've heard reviews of it, and I've heard other opinions about it. So I'm not claiming any expertise in the matter, but it didn't sing to me. Uh, that would be an interesting one. I, I, I think, yeah, that would be really cool to do a compare and contrast. And with the point being on, this is what your players bring to the game. Group A did da da da. I mean, there are, and also, can we speak in regard to that scenario, just how much your luck with sanity checks played into it? I mean, I think only 2 sanity rolls were failed the entire game. Uh, so this is not one of those topics that I think can really hold an entire stream. So I'm definitely open to discussion and stuff, because I mean, really, the key there is, um, you know, just enjoy the game, slow your campaign down to a level where people can really get to know their characters, and the key to doing that is to make the meat of of your adventures, the meat of your scenarios, about the investigation and less about the fighting. The other thing, I guess, the other part I should say here too about this is that your big bad doesn't always have to be a really tough guy who's hard to beat. Maybe he's just got a plot or a plan. And so your players will be getting less XP for beating the bad guy and therefore holding themselves back. Your early levels are probably still going to go by pretty quick, because it only takes like, what, 300 XP to get to level 2 or something like that, um, in 5th edition. So you're hard pressed to hold your players back. Though still, if you got a bunch of, first level characters, you put a challenge rating 3 or 4 monster against those first level guys, and they could still be in for some danger. While that creature is not likely going to have enough hit points to resist the full force of four or more other characters, one hit um, from that monster will likely kill those first level characters. So they really would have to play smart and uh, pick their fights. That's the other thing too, is in this kind of dangerous kind of play, the players can't just wade in and start swinging. They really are encouraged to pick their battles, draw the monster out. Uh, if they're dealing with some sort of dragony type thing, maybe they're going to set traps and make an ambush. Or, if it is a creature that goes between point A and point B by the light of the full moon, maybe they'll set up an ambush along the way, or while it's out, they'll burn down its lair. It invites the players to have to find other ways to counter the monster than just engaging in head-to-head combat, and hand-to-hand combat, head-to-head combat, whatever you want to call it. Now, yes, you went in guns blazing because it's a modern setting, and I equipped you realistically, and you had guns. I mean, um, it was also only a one shot. So I really don't feel like, in a scenario where it's a one shot, you don't want to like make the enemy too unassailable, because then people will have played for 4 hours and never reached a satisfying conclusion. Um, you know, you could have rolled a lot of misses. Let's be honest. Shield of Eyes was rolling an insane number of extreme successes on his firearms checks, and then doing enough damage to drop the creatures in one shot, even though they had armor. It was ridiculous. Your cop's body armor was ridiculously protective against the beak of the monster. And I don't want to give out too much information, because, like, obviously I don't want to like tip the hat to anybody who's going to play it in the future, but you know, um, because I think Grumpy was hoping to get in on it. But uh, my point is that the scenario went the way it did, as much because of the way you played it, but also the die rolls. Um, you guys performed phenomenally well when it came to fighting the monsters. Um, and it it was a good scenario. So yeah, I mean, we got about 15 minutes left, so I'll certainly take questions and suggestions. Um, Yeah, I mean, without, you know, without the biker, blazing away with his 357 like nobody's business, and who knows how it would have went. Um, Also, where you met the thing um, could change depending on how somebody played it. Um, your playing of the police officer, the way you played it, and I'm not going to say how you played it because I don't really want to inform anybody else's playing. Um, had a great effect on it. John's portrayal of the bumpkin farmer was really effective in having and controlling how the story went. Um, so yeah, um, but and bringing it back to topic, those are the things that are going to come into play when you're running like 5e in an investigative way. Is that those decisions? Um, oh, that's right. John was the trucker, not the farmer. Um, Gingerbeard was the farmer. Um, when the players are having to go through and go through the process of investigating and pre-planning and getting the intel for the adventure, there are opportunities for danger to come to them without having to fight. If they're doing knowledge and lore checks or they're talking with NPCs, the information they get may or may not be correct. The information they get may be as dangerous to make use of as the encounter itself. If you need to get the Book of Eben from the nameless city just to beat the big boogly boo, well, yeah, venturing uh, to the nameless city to get the book is possibly as dangerous as facing the thing, but it should be. And then the players will then have to prepare for that excursion or that expedition to get the stuff that they need to go ahead and then take on the final enemy there. Or they might have to look for alternate routes. If the monster is something that has to be beat with X, and they find out that there's two different ways for them to get it. One is perhaps easier but more dangerous, and the other one is less dangerous but near impossible. Good example would be one is laying in a ruin guarded by the dead, and the other one is in the private collection of a nobleman who really loves it. Um, yes, the ruins is probably easier, but probably more dangerous, whereas the nobleman is probably less dangerous, but nigh impossible to get because you're probably going to have to. Yeah, how are you going to get him to part with his item? You likely are going to have to go in and steal it or go on a quest for him. So then, again, you're drawing that out. Now, all of this can be put into a more standard game too. That's the last little point there is nothing I've said today can't also be used to enrich a more standard style of play. Even if you're going to have characters wading through kobolds and goblins and this, that, and the other, nothing says that you can't still have them go through the processes of investigation and jumping through hoops. Instead of having all of those critters in one place, you could frame something like, okay, we have a task that we need to complete or a treasure we want. We need, instead of just telling them where it is, maybe they know of it, or they know where it is, and now they have to find out how to get there. But to do so, they have to go to the forest of Bleh and talk to whoever. And they go there, but along the way, they are fighting monsters. Now, this isn't going to help with the drawing out of the time span at any particular character and letting them know get to know their characters anymore. But it can still it can still lengthen that out a bit, because they're going to have to go through that investigation. They might have to spend more time role playing with NPCs. They might have to do more time traveling about the world, getting to places, and a whole mini dungeon that's a tomb dive to get an item, so they can then break into whatever. There's an ancient temple, and in it is a book of infinite knowledge that you must retrieve for the canon of blah blah blah. But to get there, you need the key. The key is in the tomb of Saint blah blah blah, and you're gonna go down into the tomb, and you're gonna have to battle the tomb guardians, the traps, and the puzzles, and all of that to get the key. And then you have to get to the ancient temple and unlock it. And when you do, what is inside? Oh my God, what is that thing? We gotta beat it, and then so you can still do the whole investigative thing and not slow down the game. It's just that if you double down on that investigative play and you up the difficulty of your monsters um, at any given point in play, you will encourage your players to do their due diligence to find ways to fight it. But as a GM, you have to be willing to give them those opportunities. There has to be a payoff for them to do it. In other words, don't put a monster against them that is immune to all non-magical weapons, immune to fire, electricity, petrification, paralyzation, blah, 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 and then not give the players a way to beat it. Even if the thing to beat it is something that will only beat that thing, it still needs to be there. Okay, you've got this demon of blah blah blah, and I know there's a lot of things in my campaign world that are called blah blah blah, but you get the demon of such and such, and he's immune to all physical attacks, and he's immune to fire and electricity and blah blah blah. My throat just about gave out on me. At that point, you still have to find the dagger or the spear or the words in the book that will specifically defeat that thing. Two things that are good here is A, the players still have an ability to beat it, but also B, you're not putting something into their hands that's going to be just a catch-all that they can use against every other foe. Blah 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 or such and such. Well, make a lore check to determine. You have to make a lore check to figure out which one it actually is. Yeah, and you definitely welcome General Nut, but you also need to consider the NPCs that you're going to have. And the NPCs are another great way to pad it, whether that is rival treasure hunters or reluctant lore keepers. Or, I know, for example, in one of my Call of Cthulhu games, they were trying to get information at a hospital. They were trying to get in to visit a patient, and the desk nurse was being uncooperative. And she was seeing through all of their ruses. And so they then had to find another way to figure out what room this person was in that they needed to talk to. They knew that they were at the hospital. So it ended up being a method of trying to they took like the pretty, they schmoozed one of the other nurses, just one of the standard kind of like, orderly nurses, the ones, who like delivers fruit cocktail and, and pillows, not really an actual nurse to distract the desk nurse, or I can't remember exactly the specifics, but basically they used a secondary NPC to engage the obstacle of that first NPC. And you could do this with a lot of things, like, okay, the wizard at the tower won't let you in to give you the lore you need. Maybe you can bribe his apprentice. It's like, okay. I can see by your clothing and the bruise on your face, young sir, that you are ill treated by your master. Um, I would be willing to give you this shiny bag of gold to better your lot in life in exchange for you leaving the back door to the tower open or unlocked, or perhaps telling me how I might get into the undercroft of his tower so I might come up through the floor. There you go. But your players are going to have to role play. They're going to have to think of that, and they're going to have to role play that. As the GM, your job there is to keep the verisimilitude of the world, um, and allow them to make those checks. It could be that the apprentice is fearful of the wizard and very loyal, or very loyal, and so doesn't want to betray him. But it doesn't mean that the players can't then trick the oafish apprentice, or maybe it's not even an apprentice. Maybe it's just the stable boy who works at who works for the wizard, keeps his livestock alive so the wizard can have fresh eggs and milk every day. Um, it's play with that world, but the world has to be accessible to your players in a way that's meaningful and useful. Um, the last thing you want to do is be the cock blocking GM who just says no to every good idea your players have. Those good ideas don't always have to give the players exactly what they want as directly as they want it, but a good idea that makes sense should lead to some sort of result. It could be that, yes, the wizard's apprentice does indeed leave the back door to the tower unlocked. Doesn't mean that the wizard doesn't know about it or isn't waiting for the players, but that could come down to a predetermined decision by you as the DM, or it could come down based on the margin of success in a die roll. Um, Call of Cthulhu has a luck roll, a luck stat, so it's always fun to be able to make a luck check for me. Okay, well, yeah, you get in there, but the wizard is waiting for you. Uh, um, all right, have a good game, Mister Mage's Musing. Go make that juicy review cap fuel for us. Have a good one, man. Yeah, unintended consequences are good, but you also have to deal those out. They're like spices. Too many unintended consequences spoils the dish and makes you just look like an asshole. Um, because your players are going to catch on real quick that no matter what they do, you're always going to bite them in the ass, um, even if they get what they wanted or what they're looking for. So yeah, sprinkle it on, some little magic dust, but don't you know be moderate in your consumption of your GM juice, and don't go full Scarface on it. That would be the last recommendation there. So all right, so got a couple of minutes left in the stream. I think we're coming up on that hour. I usually block out an hour with these things, and then if it and allow for 2 hours, but I don't think we got 2 hours in me today. Um, the uh, brain completely froze up. Sorry, clearly too early. Not enough of this. I'll be making a second one before I have to go engage in Saxis's game. Real quick, I want to call out to those folks who showed up who have channels. Mage's Musings. I'm sure he's getting sick of everybody talking about how amazing his channel is, and with his fun review caps where he reviews and recaps his modules and products and the adventures of his party, his various parties. He's got a couple of them going on. His shorts have been completely on point. Both, I'm sure, the ones he wears to the beach and the ones he puts on the internet. But no, his shorts are just really cool, solid bricks of knowledge, and every one he puts out, I'm just like, I never knew that was in AD&D. Of course, there's John, the old geek. Uh, I think we're all of us kind of here in this space to a great deal because of him. Uh, I mean, I'm going to gush a little bit here because I think shouting out people's channels is great, and we do it almost every episode. But if not for John, I would not be streaming again. If not for Mage's Musings encouragement, I would not be streaming again, or would not be YouTubing again. Streaming is kind of new. But also, we've kind of created this wonderful little kind of cross-pollinating community of gamers. It's good. Let's see. Uh, yeah. I mean, thank you, Tonka. Um, I of course have a channel because you're here. Like, share, and subscribe, and do all of the things that YouTube says that I have to tell you to do. Otherwise, I am a horrible person who does not deserve attention by the algorithm. Um, but that said, I do have. So I'm going to pick out a time to run the Don't Get Out scenario for Call of Cthulhu again. TBD on that one. I'm currently working on another Call of Cthulhu scenario that I want to run for folks. This one will have a larger maximum number of players and may require 2 sessions, although simply because I don't know if the pace of it will really fit into one. But that one is set in the more classic era of Call of Cthulhu rather than Don't Get Out, which is modern. So look for that. I did tease it on my Discord, and when I have that ready to go, I will then post an event for it. And like the other session I ran, it's going to be kind of first come first serve, and then we'll backfill based on who can make it and who can't. Also, when I run Don't Get Out again, preferential slot placement will go to those who did not get into the first playthrough, who wanted to be in the first playthrough. All right. Let's see. Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Oh, cool. I would be happy to play in that and test it out. The new scenario I'm working on is titled A Bilious Land Below a Gibbous Moon. So take from that what you will. All right. Well, that has been the stream for today. Thank you all for showing up. It was a good count and great participation. I enjoyed it immensely. As usual, get out and game, enjoy your Sunday, and really consider, throwing some investigation into the old D&D. I doubt your players will hate it unless they hate thinking. So have a good one, folks. Take care.